the experts told us that a Conservative could never attract a crowd like this on the island, but we proved them wrong, didn't we? You know, we only lost this seat by 1,281 votes. I think we have more than that number of people in this room tonight, don't we? And thank you very much to the great Carolyn Finley, co-chair of my campaign. She's the pride and joy of Lady Smith, and she's a former minister, and she's going to be a great part of the future Poilievre government. You know what we're doing today? We're getting out the vote. You know, it's like if you're a farmer. There's no point in planting the crop in the spring if you're not going to harvest it in the fall. We planted 311,591 seeds in the spring. That's how many memberships we sold. Over 300,000, right? But they have no value unless the people who bought those memberships actually send in their ballot. In other words, unless we harvest the crop. Have any of you in this room voted yet? Yes. You know what? The reason that we've been able to sign up this record-smashing number of people is because across Canada, from coast to coast to coast to coast, people are ready to take back control of their lives, right? That's right. Big bossy government has taken your money and told you what to do and left people feeling powerless and helpless. Well, and broke. That's right. Woke and broke, right? You know, whether it is the countless people who served their employers loyally for decades only to lose their jobs because of a personal medical decision, right? You all know those stories, right? Those same people are ready to take back control of their lives by joining my campaign so that we can put a total end to all of the COVID vaccine mandates. Or is that retired couple that did everything right? They saved their money, they set aside for their retirement, they moved to the island, and now because food price inflation of 10% year over year, they now have to choose between feeding themselves and buying their essential medication. Or it's the single mother who's putting water in her children's milk because she cannot afford a full, nutritious diet for them. Or it's the working guy in Northern Ontario, from Timmins, who could not afford the $2.50 a liter diesel to gas up his truck and drive to Thunder Bay and see his dying parents one last time. Or it's the countless 35-year-olds living in their parents' basements because house prices have doubled under Justin Trudeau. And you know, I was in Vancouver and I mentioned the 35-year-old living in mom's basement. I said, how do you even bring a date home if you're in mom's basement? And there was a lady in the front row who said, very carefully. When I was 14, it was just through the side window. But when you're 35, it's a little harder to do that. And it's kind of an attack on your sense of personal independence when you can't actually start a family or build home equity or collateral or credit history. You can't control your life if you can't own that little piece of dirt on which you build your own little piece of paradise, right? That's what homeownership means. And nowhere has that been worse than right here in British Columbia, where in Vancouver itself, we have the highest house prices in the nation, the third worst housing bubble on planet Earth when you compare median income to median house prices. Of course, those prices have radiated out to Vancouver Island, and to many even rural communities across British Columbia. Why are costs rising so fast in this country? Well, the cost of government is driving up the cost of living. $500 billion of inflationary deficits mean more money chasing fewer goods, which always leads to higher prices. It's a necessary result that has always occurred over thousands of years of history when emperors, kings, queens, presidents, prime ministers have created new cash to fund their spending. It has always inflated the cost of living of the working class, but the assets of the super wealthy. Of course, it is a transfer of wealth from the have-nots to the have-yots, who are getting richer and better off. A smaller group of elite who are continuously consolidating power and control at the expense of the working masses who do the labor of the nation. That is what is happening in this country. It's very simple. You have 10 loaves of bread and $10. It's $1 for each loaf. You double the number of dollars to 20. You still have 10 loaves of bread. It's now $2 for each loaf. More money buying the same bread is meaning higher bread prices. And on top, Trudeau has added taxes, making it more expensive to make that bread. So the more he spends, the more things cost. It is just inflation, isn't it? Yeah. Inflation caused by Justin Trudeau. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to get government spending under control. That is the root cause of the problem. To start with, we're going to get rid of wasteful spending, like the $35 billion infrastructure bank. A bank that has paid bonuses to its executives, guaranteed the profits of large multinational corporations, but in 5 years has not completed a single solitary infrastructure project. We will get rid of the $35 billion infrastructure bank. We will save $1 billion by defunding the CBC. Yeah! Politicians play by the same rules with your money that you play by in your household, right? You know, if you want to spend more in one area, you spend less in another. It's the law of scarcity. The great Thomas Sowell, the economist, says the number one rule of economics is scarcity. People always want more than there is to have. And the number one rule of politics is to ignore the number one rule of economics, right? Politicians are the only creatures in the universe that don't have to live with scarcity. They just pass it on to someone else in higher inflation, taxes, or debt. Well, we're going to change that. We're going to pass something called the pay-as-you-go law. Very simple. Every time the politician brings in a new dollar of spending, he has to find a new dollar of savings to pay for it. They did this in the United States in the 90s. They balanced the budget, paid off $400 billion of debt, and as soon as they let the law lapse, they went right back into deficit, proving politicians need legal limits on their spending, and they will get it when I'm Prime Minister. You've been pinching your pennies long enough. Than every other Prime Minister in Canada's history combined. He's doubled our debt in just 7 years. We're going to put an end to that, and we're going to discipline our central bank to get it back to its core job, which is not printing money, but it is to provide stable prices, low prices, to protect the purchasing power of your loonie. You know what happens to a waitress or a mechanic or a barber if they don't do their job? They get fired. But a big shot banker who works for Justin Trudeau and recently said to CEOs across the country that they should not raise workers' wages to keep up with inflation, he gets to keep his job, and his fellow bankers have all gotten bonuses after they failed in their one job, which is to keep inflation at 2%, not 8% as it is now. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring the real world to Ottawa. When big, powerful decision makers don't do their jobs, they will be fired. I will bring in a new government. Instead of creating more cash, we're going to create more of what cash buys. Grow more food, build more houses, and produce more energy right here in Canada, right? Let's go back to the analogy. You have 10 loaves of bread and $10. What if, instead of doubling the amount of money, you doubled the amount of bread? If you got 20 loaves of bread for 10 bucks, now it's 50 cents a loaf. Prices go down. With technology and trade, prices should be going down. But we have to get the gatekeepers out of the way that prevent us from producing the goods and services that we need. Let's start with housing. Do you know Canada has the fewest houses per capita of any country in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on? Why? Local government gatekeepers stand in the way of construction. In Vancouver, the average cost of government for every unit of housing is $600,000. That is the cost of permitting delays, of zoning restrictions, of consultants, lawyers, lobbyists, and every other paperwork cost. And all of that gets passed on to the customer. It's great if you already own a mansion because it means your housing price goes up, but if you are just a working class kid trying to own a home, you are out of luck. Well, listen, this is how it's going to work when I'm Prime Minister. Yes, like this young man here. Young man, this is my plan, okay? I'm going to link the number of infrastructure dollars the federal government gives to big overpriced cities to the number of houses they allow to be completed, so that they will be incentivized to get the gatekeepers out of the way and let builders build. Second, I'm going to require that every single federally funded transit station have pre-approved building permits for high-density apartments, condos, and other housing so young people can live right next to the bus or train and they don't even have to own a car. Finally, we are going to sell off 1/3 of the 15% of the 37,000 underutilized federal buildings so that we can convert that into affordable housing and use the proceeds to pay down the debt. And you know, it just warms my heart to think of that beautiful family, maybe this young man right after he gets married, pulling up in his he's like, I'm getting married. Dad, I'm out of here. Just imagine though, pulling up in a beautiful U-Haul and unloading his belongings into his wonderful new home in the former headquarters of the CBC. That 4 in 5 families have had to cut their diets because of food prices when we have the 5th most abundant supply of farmland per capita anywhere on planet Earth. Food should be cheap in Canada. We got the best farmers and the best land, but of course the government, gatekeepers, drive up the cost with new regulations and red tape that make it more expensive to produce, new carbon taxes, which Trudeau wants to increase by 200%, including here in BC, that increase the cost of drying and fertilizer and other off-farm expenses. Furthermore, the Trudeau government wants to impose a 1/3 cut in fertilizer use. Well, think about that for a second. That means you're going to need more land to produce the same amount of food. So our tractors and our combines are going to have to travel longer distances, burning more fuel. And more of our food will be produced in foreign countries where they don't have these rules and therefore their costs are low. We'll import that food and it will come on trucks and trains and ships burning more fuel. By the way, didn't we learn during COVID how incredibly crazy and irresponsible it was for us to depend on the rest of the world to take care of us for our essentials? A Poilievre government will eliminate the carbon tax, will remove the fertilizer ban, will get out of the way and stand by the side of our farmers so that we can produce our own food and be And then there's the issue of energy. Why in God's green earth are we bringing in 130,000 barrels of overseas oil from polluting foreign dictatorships on the other side of the Atlantic? Isn't it crazy? You know, how is that good for the environment? I never see the protesters, the woke protesters, standing at the port in St. John, New Brunswick, protesting against the tankers that come from the Middle East. They just want to protest against the First Nations who are trying to build a better life for themselves here in Canada through energy development. Well, here's my plan on that. A Poilievre government will remove Bill C-69 and replace it with a law that consults First Nations, protects our environment, but gets projects built so that we can replace overseas oil with oil that is produced ethically and by Canadians generating paychecks. trillion cubic feet of natural gas that we have right here in Canada. What a humiliation. A month ago, Trudeau had to violate his own sanctions on Russia in order to send a gas pipeline turbine back from Montreal to Putin. We've been maintaining it in Montreal. Apparently, we're against building pipelines in Canada, but we're in favor of maintaining the equipment for pipelines in Russia. Now Putin can pump his gas more into Germany, which will then pay that money back to Russia to fund the war in Ukraine, right? That's the policy we have now, is to fund foreign wars by helping dictators pump their natural resources while we ban the production of those resources here. We had 15 natural gas liquefaction projects proposed when Trudeau took office. Do you know how many have been completed since? Zero. Do you know how much natural gas we directly export overseas from Canada today? Zero. Not a single cubic feet, despite the fact we have massive advantages. The shortest distance to Europe from North America is Newfoundland. The shortest distance to Asia from North America is British Columbia. Shorter shipping distance than the Americans. You know what other advantage we have? You gotta liquefy the gas. How do you do that? You cool it down. What do we have in Canada?
Snow.
It's amazing. It's just, nobody thought of this. Cold weather. It's our most abundant natural resource. Cold weather. Right? Although you guys don't get cold weather here, stop your complaining. I'll tell you something, it gets so cold in Ottawa at wintertime, sometimes Justin Trudeau has his hands in his own pockets. So what we're going to do is we're going to get out of the way, approve natural gas projects so that we can liquefy our gas here, cool it down to minus 161 degrees Celsius, put it on a ship, send it to Europe to break the European dependence on Putin, send it to Asia to shut down dirty coal-fired plants, and bring that money from dollars to dictators into paychecks for our people in Canada again. Speaking of standing up for our people in Canada, we will have a government under my leadership that works for Canadians, and I will ban all my ministers from any involvement in the World Economic Forum. And you know what? She wanted me to repeat that one more time. One more time? What do you think? One more time? Just to make it clear, if any of my ministers want to go to that big fancy conference of billionaires with the World Economic Forum in Davos, they better make it a one-way ticket because they won't be back in my cabinet. We're going to stand up to the gatekeepers who try to control what we see and say, right? These woke warriors want to control what other people say. They're always talking about new ways to divide us. You know, Trudeau wants to divide us on race, ethnicity, sexuality, and now vaccine status. Next year, he'll have found out some other dividing line he can use to turn Canadians against their neighbors. Why? Well, it's the oldest trick in the book. Divide and conquer, right? If he can make you afraid of your neighbor, of your truck driver, of your coworker, then he can make you turn to him and offer him more power to protect you against your fellow citizen. Ladies and gentlemen, divide and conquer is the worst way to lead a country. And that is why we're going to change that. We're going to focus on uniting for freedom. Here's the difference between control and freedom. You fight over control, you fight for freedom. There's only 100% control to go around, so if one gets more, another gets less. Freedom is entirely different. If your neighbor gets more freedom, you don't get less freedom, you get more freedom. If your Muslim friend gets more religious freedom, you as a Christian, Hindu, or Sikh will also have more religious freedom, right? If your local small businessman gets more freedom from red tape, you'll have more freedom to buy his products affordably, and your teenager might have more freedom to get a job working for him. So instead of divide and conquer, why don't we unite for freedom in this country?
Yeah!
The first freedom, the freedom with which it all begins, is freedom of expression. And so, let's start with this. C11. The Liberals want to give the CRTC gatekeepers the power to control what shows up in your news feed or your YouTube stream. That means that they would control what other people think and say. That is not freedom of expression. Furthermore, we see on our university campuses the administration cracking down on anybody who disagrees with the new, woke, politically correct consensus. They threw Justin Peterson out of the University of Toronto. Listen, you don't agree with Jordan Peterson. Debate him. Good luck with that, right? Don't silence him. Have a debate. Open it up. So here's the plan, folks. Poilievre government will repeal the censorship law C11 and will require every university that gets federal research grants to commit to upholding Section 2B rights to freedom of expression for both its students and its faculty. Because our purpose is smaller government and bigger citizens. A country where people get ahead by how hard they work. And a meritocracy, not an aristocracy. When I was growing up as a kid in Calgary, I was adopted from a 16-year-old unwed mother whose own mom had just died. 2 teachers took me in, and they raised me to believe that in this country, it didn't matter where I came from, it mattered where I was going, it didn't matter who I knew, but what I could do. And that is the country we're going to bring back in this country again. Great Western Canadian Prime Minister John Diefenbaker. I am a Canadian, a free Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I think wrong, free to worship God in my own way, free to choose those who shall govern my country. It is this heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and for all of mankind. Thank you very much.